to a very special edition of the morning meeting. We'll be spending the first 30 minutes looking at the life and times of Gene Hackman, and then the last 30 minutes reading aloud from the Epstein files. No, just kidding. We're not doing that. Thank you for joining. Normal episode. Dan and Sean here with me to talk about the day. Lots going on. At least one Trump press conference today. On days when we only have one, it's a little disappointing. It's kind of a letdown. I like two minimum. But
Oh,
there's
I
one on
think
the
you
schedule.
get the Starmer is
Yeah.
happening, and then there's
Yeah.
always, I think that there's going to
There'll
be
be two. There'll be
yeah.
two. There'll be two, but there's only one on the schedule. Anyway, I'll run through the schedule. Dan, Sean, and I will kick things around. Then we'd love your questions. If you're here on the two-way platform, please raise your hand. We'll get to many of you soon. If you're watching on YouTube or X, can't raise your hand, but you can go in the chat. And if you do, peace, love, and understanding. Keep the hate out of the chat, please. And extend the presumption of grace to all. We're going to talk about some topics today that are going to get some people's dander up. We want everybody in the conversation, regardless of whether you like Donald Trump or don't like Donald Trump. Please raise your hand, be part of our talk. All right. President today is receiving his second of three planned British European leaders today. It's the UK PM arrives at 12:15, greeted by the president after the president gets his intelligence briefing at 11:15. Bilateral meeting with the prime minister. They meet in the Oval for photo op at 12:20. That will probably be, as Sean suggested, a press conference. Then they have a bilateral lunch. We'll try to get the menu for you because that'll be of interest to folks. And then they're scheduled to have a 2 o'clock press conference. Again, if you're going to Ladbrokes, bet on that sliding. More like 3 would be my guess. But anyway, there'll be a press conference. Don't know what the vice president's doing, except I know he'll be in these meetings because he's in everything, because he's kind of like practically deputy president. In Turkey today, U.S. and Russian officials are meeting to talk about the modalities of reestablishing staffing of their respective embassies in Moscow and Washington. This is a part of the ongoing process, we believe, that's going to lead up not just to a peace deal, but to a meeting between the two heads of government, Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump. And there's other conversations taking place, I'm told, to try to set that up. House and Senate are both in. And the House Democratic leader, Mr. Jeffries, holding his weekly press conference at 11:30 during our time on the air. The Senate Help Committee will hold a confirmation hearing for Lori Sanchez de Remer, who has been nominated to be the labor secretary, and she may get through with some Democratic support.
Yeah, she got at least one public.
Yeah,
I think Maggie
yeah,
Hassan from New
yeah,
Hampshire, which counters
exactly.
the Rand Paul no vote.
Exactly. So she should get out of committee and then she'll be confirmed. And she's an interesting choice because she's easily the most liberal, unless you count Bobby Kennedy, I guess, of the nominees. The other thing that's happening today, and I don't know when, I alluded to it earlier, is last night on Fox, the Attorney General said she was going to release some portion of the Epstein files today. And don't know what's going to be in there, but and obviously lots has been disclosed, but presumably there'll be some new news, and we'll be covering that whenever it comes out.
What
Maybe
do you
it'll
think
come
the
out
over under
during
is
this hour.
on number of politicians that are on that list?
I mean, I don't know if she's really going to put
Current
out
or
a
former
list.
or both?
Is she really going to put out a list with names on it with no backup, just accusations? I don't know. Maybe she will.
I mean, that's. I think it's like Geraldo in the vault, though. If you put out the Epstein files and there's no names, and it's kind of like.
We'll see. I will say, I know there's titillation about the names of the men. For the victims need to be first and foremost in everybody's minds, right? And so
I had,
whatever.
it's funny you said that, Mark. I had Marsha Blackburn on my show a couple days ago, and she's been huge on this, pushing Kash Patel and AG. And I admittedly went into the interview and I said, what is it, your fixation on this? Because she's been at the forefront of this. And she just went into an impassioned concern for child trafficking. And you do forget how horrible this is. And as much as people want to make light of some of these people who were probably on this, the disastrous outcome for so many young girls in particular is something that shouldn't be forgotten in this whole thing.
Yeah, that's my point exactly. Just, I know people are titillated by the men names the men, and there needs to be accountability for anybody who broke the law, but the focus should be on the victims, and many of them are still not pleased with where things stand on either the civil side or the criminal side. So I'd ask all of you why you, if there is a release, to focus on the victims at least as much as you focus on the titillating parts that will be of great interest, as Dan suggested before we started, on the Upper East Side of Manhattan as well as here in Washington. All right. The focus of the meeting, the president today with the British PM is on Ukraine. Yesterday, in one of his many Q&As, the president, I thought, spoke more favorably about Zelensky, not across the board, but spoke more favorably about Zelensky and about America's commitment to Ukraine than he has of late. So, Sean, where do you think the president's head is at this point regarding both Zelensky and Putin? And we still expect Zelensky in Washington tomorrow, although at some point he's going to have to get on a plane, and it appears the deal isn't quite done. So where do you think things stand?
So a couple of things. I would just make the Prime Minister held an event last night at the residence, and I would say while the focus is definitely Ukraine, they are trade is literally number 2 on that issue, tariffs and a potential UK-US trade deal. But that's they'll get through Ukraine and then immediately go to trade issues. I think that the president has already announced Zelensky coming in the deal, so he needs this thing to close and to happen because he's already there. I think getting a deal where we provide some kind of basic support financially and or advisors or whatever, as long as Europe is leading the charge, it will sell well, and that's what he cares about. So I feel good about the deal coming through. Zelensky knows that he's on the clock. So I feel actually pretty good about this. The question is, does Starmer today give reassurances that both UK and France and potentially Germany, whatever, who have the bulk of the troops, if you will, are they willing to make enough of a commitment for security to appease him? Because we're not doing a boots on the ground situation. He is 100% clear on that.
Dan.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting the last 72 hours about this is Zelensky and Trump announced that they were going to do this tomorrow, but the details weren't really agreed to. And both parties seem to want to say we're going to do this and kind of commit to getting together. Then Zelensky is kind of hedged a little to say he wasn't confirmed he was coming. And I think it's because it appears that Trump is going to triumphantly kind of say, like, I won. We're getting something. We don't know what this minerals deal is. And we're not guaranteeing the security. If the reports are correct, and I think it was the Journal has seen this, like, whatever term sheet, let's call it, we support the idea of Ukraine being protected. And I think, as Sean said, the idea is the Europeans will provide it. But it sounds like we are not committing either financially or whether it's advisors or anything. We have not in writing committed to it. So I find it fascinating that Zelensky is essentially going to come and be a prop to Trump's victory. And ultimately, obviously, the goal is to end the war. And Trump, I think, will be able to say, like, I got Zelensky on board. And for Zelensky, you're committing to something without anything in return, which is remarkable.
He doesn't, but the fact is, Zelensky doesn't have much to negotiate with, right? I mean, he comes in, he doesn't have any, he's not coming in from a position of strength. I think that this is also three-dimensional chess. Trump gets Europeans to buy into security, long-term security and peacekeeping. The Ukrainians are giving us some earth mineral rights. And then he can go to Putin and say, dude, you better buy in on this deal because everybody's in a good place. And so I think from how this thing is working out, this has the potential to have the only real outcome that's possible.
Well, I mean, the challenge is Putin is incredibly sophisticated and strategic, right? So the question is, does he see this as just like, I got a couple miles in Ukraine and it's the end of it, we're going to go back? Or does he see this a little bit differently? Like, I'm getting a peace deal with no U.S. presence. The Europeans really can't provide this, and just give me a year or two and I'm going to go,
So I think you're right, Dan. I'll take it a couple more years out. I think that Putin knows I can't screw with anybody while Trump's in office, because Trump will actually go, I think, would retaliate. And because he would find it an affront to his leadership. So I think if I'm Putin, I basically say, give me a deal I can live with, and I'll see where we are in 4 years. And because that's, I think, where his head's at. He knows that Trump will not tolerate the annexation of any further land or hostilities under his watch.
I agree with Sean. And I'll just say, I think there's a possibility the deal will not be done until they're face to face in the room. I think there could be I's to dot and T's to cross that happen in the room, from what I've heard.
But I think, Sean, another way to look at that, though, I just need to say this, is that Putin looks at it as Trump won't screw with me. Like, I'm going to reload for 3 years. I'm going to plan. I'm going to rebuild my military. I'm going to get money flowing back into our coffers. And as soon as he leaves, I will relaunch this again.
Yeah.
And JD Vance can deal with it.
Now, look, I will say this. We've talked a lot about the optics of all this. And so there's two things that I think are important for the record. Number one, I don't like the chaos, and this has never happened, and the Europeans aren't sitting in the proper seat when there's a table. Who cares? I said this a week ago. I'll say it again. Outcomes. That's what matters. And President Trump, if this thing holds, should get credit for ending this war. Number one. Number two, say what you will, but as an American taxpayer, where you have watched money just get thrown, good money after bad money after bad money after bad money to Ukraine, and the Ukrainians even saying that they can't find it. Our own State Department talking about massive corruption. For a president to finally go in and put a deal on the table that the United States gets something out of this, I think should be applauded.
All right. We'll obviously keep talking about this, and tomorrow's going to be a big day, and we'll know more by the time we reconvene. We could talk endlessly about the different parameters and scenarios involving avoiding a government shutdown in a couple of weeks. And we can talk about the ways, all the challenges to avoiding a shutdown. But Dan, what's the most likely scenario to avoid a shutdown at this point?
A 1-year continuing resolution, and the far, the Freedom Caucus just has to swallow hard.
And the Pentagon has to swallow hard. Those would be the two
Correct.
people who would most object. Sean, is that what's going to happen?
I think so. They're going to figure out some way to say, guys, don't let this get in the way of this big reconciliation deal. Yep. Let's patchwork this together. I think that's absolutely right.
And you guys are sure enough Democrats would go for that?
I think yes, I do.
Okay. All right.
I will say this. One of the things that we have not talked about in a while, and I still am on the team. They're going to put some conditions and money in there for California. And if you think about what California's, I think delegation's 54. So there's probably 2 Republicans left. I think Darrell Issa, Young.
No, there's I think 5 or 6.
I know. I'm being facetious. But all you need is 1 or 2. And so if you can get a couple in that Palisades, LA area to say, I got to suck it up because we need money. If I were Speaker Johnson, I'd put some conditions on that to sell the aid, which is also a big thing for conservatives to say that there are reforms in here, whether it's the water management or whatever. But I think that they could get a win in this and pull a Democrat or 2 aboard, because you don't need 5, you need 2 or 3.
Yep. Raise your hand here if you're on the two-way platform, want to be in on the conversation. All right. I want to talk about the White House Correspondents Association. They're at war with the White House, and it escalated yesterday in all sorts of ways, including the replacement of people in the pool. Today in the pool is The Independent and News Nation and the Daily Signal. I don't believe those entities previously were allowed in the pool. Now CBS is in the pool. Reuters is the wire. SRN Radio. I confess I don't know what that is. You guys know what that is?
Salem Radio
SRN?
Network.
Salem Radio Network. I know what Salem Radio Network is. I didn't see the abbreviation. Are they in the radio pool traditionally, or is that new?
I thought they were, but when that came out, I questioned it. So I don't believe so, because I've never seen them fly on the plane. I don't remember that. So.
So this matters for a number of reasons. It matters because there are First Amendment issues here, and there's coverage issues and accountability issues. There's also the fact that the White House can discombobulate the White House correspondents, because they're all thinking about this as opposed to accountability in a more broader way. It also matters, I think, something we'll talk about in a second, which is the broader power plays that are going on, not just in the White House, but throughout corporate world and academia and Hollywood. It's all sorts of changes happening. But before we get to the more general topic, Sean, it's clear to me that folks in the White House are being very sophisticated about how they're conducting this war against the White House Correspondents Association. What do you see in the White House Correspondents Association? Are they playing a sophisticated game back, or are they just completely overmatched?
They're overmatched. So they put out a statement last night under, we've talked about Eugene Daniels, under his name, basically saying, so this is the way it worked. We described the pool in the past, right? So they all go into the Oval Office or whatever, the plane, and the president will speak or whatever. And then they send dispatches back. So the print pooler will write up, entered the room, the president, everything from the description of the room, that there were 5 people standing around him. Here's who they were. He was standing behind the desk. They're trying to give color to the room and the situation. And then they'll put phrases together. So they'll say, the president remarked on this. He was asked 5 questions. I'll try to pull one up right now.
Yeah, and some of these things are visible in the video that everybody gets of the event. Some of them are not because the camera doesn't show them. And if it's Air Force One and the president comes back and talks, they're not typically, sometimes they are, but they're not typically on camera. Or if the president comes back and speaks off the record, or an official does. So some of the pool material, it's simply getting stuff out quicker. Some of it is, it's if you don't get it from the pool report, you're not going to get it.
Right. And it's sometimes very basic stuff. The helicopter took off at, so I'm reading this. This is from yesterday, 1:47 p.m. Some cabinet members are scheduled to do local media in the Rose Garden. There is also a probability that some may stop by the Sticks, which is an area right outside the West Wing where they have locations. It's just updating the pool on, the rest of the correspondence. And so the reason I say all that is to just explain, the White House Correspondents Association last night said, hey, if these guys are going to expand the pool, we have certain standards that we have given our members who do these dispatches and reports to us. We can't verify them. So everybody should potentially stop sending those dispatches anymore. So the way it works, Mark Halperin's the pooler for the day, is what they call it. He goes in and writes the report, blah, 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 and you send it to an email, and then it gets distributed to all the members that are on that list. They're telling their folks, you guys might want to stop doing that, which I think is interesting because it sort of like that, when my mom used to say, just cut off your nose to spite itself or whatever. It's like you're
your face.
Yeah. You're holding the whole group. You're screwing everybody now for doing that. Again, this is silly because it's additive. They're adding people to the pool. So it's just they're getting pissed that they can't be controlling it anymore.
Right. So Dan, their goal, I think, would be to go back to the way it was before. That's not going to happen. So if you weren't advising the White House Correspondents Association, what should their goals be now in this war where they are, as Sean said, overmatched, and how should they achieve them?
Yeah, look, I think this isn't chess. This is boxing, and they're getting almost knocked out. I would collaborate with them. I mean, at the end of the day, if they take their ball and try to go home and say, well, now you can't get the news out, that's absurd. They can go right around.
It hurts everybody.
Right. They can click a button and send out the news.
Okay. So what should they should go to Caroline Leavitt and say what? What should their goals be now?
Just say, look, we don't want to keep being at war. We understand you want to add new voices. We fully support it. I would just move past this. I know we're going to get to this, but the idea that they are God, they are bigger than the White House, and they control this process, it's just crazy. I mean, you have to modernize, you have to move forward. And I don't see how they're going to win because they are content providers. They are not content producers. The producers are the White House. It always will be.
The fundamental problem in this is I've spoken to both sides on this. Last night, I had an opportunity to speak to a couple senior members of the White House Correspondents Organization, as well as I've obviously talked to the folks. The problem is we've talked about, and I jokingly said to someone last night, Eugene Daniels, who leads this, who's currently still a Politico employee, has announced that he's leaving. We all know the dirty secret because he's going to MSNBC. Therefore, it won't be a White House correspondent, anymore. And I jokingly said to somebody last night, a member of the Correspondents Association, I said, if you guys were smart, you would make the case that, hey, or allow him to leave the presidency because the White House is not going to negotiate with him. He is an outspoken fanboy of Kamala. And so they have a leadership problem right now, and it gives them the perfect reason. But, this is where ego gets in the way. He wants to chair the dinner and hang out with the Hollywood folks, and he selected the comedian. This is their problem. This is a situation where leadership matters. And the Correspondents Association, to your point, Dan, it's a game of boxing, but it's boxing with someone who doesn't, has never been in the ring. And they have a feckless leader who no one respects at the White House. And that's the fundamental problem.
They need to
Guys, when
replace.
Democrats have power again, and we will,
Yeah.
like, we'll choose who to put in the pool. Like,
Yeah.
great, you know. And if it's one-sided, and we pay a price, we pay a price. Like, the market will dictate this,
Yeah.
not a
Sean,
bunch of people sitting around.
Sean, yesterday I said if we were at the White House, they would have let us come to the photo op. Did you notice that they let our friend from Fox and Friends into the photo
Yeah,
op? Even though
Lawrence.
Lawrence was not in the pool, but Lawrence got to ask a bunch of questions. And so you're going to see more of that. People have asked me, like, what does it matter who's in the room? It's like, who cares? Well, one thing is you do get to ask questions. Now, some people ask good questions and some bad, but you get an opportunity to ask the president questions. And in theory, that should be a moment of accountability. And the other is the prestige of it, right? It's the prestige of it. And then a third I'd say is, again, if you're good at your job, you're going to get some things that the camera might not see. I'll try to put this in a broader context, which I've been thinking a lot about. I really think the left does not understand what's happening all over the country. MAGA is on fire with a sense of retribution and a sense of the opportunity to make big change, to pressure corporations, to pressure universities, to pressure the media, to pressure Hollywood, to say, new sheriff in town, old ways don't count. We are going to change it. And the right is thinking about this constantly. They're taking ground. Every day they're saying, what ground can we take at Boeing? What ground can we take at Delta? What ground can we take at CAA? What ground can we take at the Olympic Committee? What ground can we take at the White House Correspondents Association? And my perception from watching and talking to people on the left is they have no idea that this is even happening. They don't appreciate how fundamental this change is. Sean, what do you think of my thesis?
I think it's funny you bring up CAA, which is it's one of the largest Hollywood talent agencies. So you've got CAA, UTA, WME. When there are countless people on the right who have signed with them in the past, and at the slightest hint of controversy, CAA will drop them. And so to your point, Mark, about retribution, I mean, this has been like since college, where this isn't Donald Trump. It's just that finally somebody has taught the right how to fight back and to say we can win. I get sent some magazines every month, just because people will send me one. And one of the magazines that I got was last month was called Fast Company. It's a business magazine.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, there's an article. I'm just flipping through it, seeing what it's all about. And there's an article that says why I've got it down. I could get it for tomorrow, but it says like, why are corporations caving to Robbie Starbuck? And Robbie Starbuck has been on a mission to go after corporations and call out their DEI policies. And literally, I've asked him this, how does this work? He goes, oh, I literally call up the PR office and I'll say, hey, I'm going after Target or McDonald's DEI policies. They will literally get the CEO on the phone with him within a matter of hours and say, okay, hey, mea culpa, we're undoing this. This is where we are now, that finally, and this is a huge flip from where we were a few years ago, where people were like, hey, we're going to ban people who associated with Trump. We're going to go after their employers. We're going to go after their ability to, be seen in public. So there is this, Mark used the word retribution, and it's true. There is an element to which people on the right who have been banned, canceled, censored, finally feel like, hey, we can actually proudly stand up, walk down a street, and be excited for the side that we support.
Dan, one of the things that happened yesterday that fit with the paradigm I'm suggesting is Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, said we're basically going to become the Wall Street Journal editorial board, at least on the issues of liberty and the free markets. How significant, not in terms of the morale at the paper, where we know it's significant, how significant is that as a cultural moment for Jeff Bezos to say our editorial board's not going to be liberal anymore?
Oh, it's a big moment on the left. I mean, I think the only thing bigger would be if the New York Times announced, we were going to do something similar. I think the issue for the left, and speaking of the Post, it goes back to November, is they have kind of convinced themselves that November was unwinnable, that it was inflation and we didn't really do anything wrong. It was like a force du jour of world events. And, Trump is, I guess we'll say, a good candidate, but nothing to have to really change on our side. And I think that they don't, they haven't come to grips with why Trump is popular. But I think what is really happening, Mark, with all of this stuff is, as is usually the case in American politics, it is the silent middle that slowly over the last 20 years became frustrated with woke issues. They became frustrated with, if you're a regular family in, the middle class, the challenges your children have if they are of a certain background, right? Because companies had to have a profile and they had to fill certain positions, and colleges had to have certain numbers of people, and there were all these factors beyond kind of meritocracy and beyond people's control. And it's been building in our society, and companies that even swung in the last 4 years. I know a lot of people who would say it was very hard to find positions. It was very hard to, we struggled, productivity lacked, because we had to meet all these different terms and all these different definitions. And we felt like we were on pins and needles, and people worried about, offending people. And so I think as Trump has pushed these buttons, there was a big middle of the country, literally and figuratively, it was like, amen, we're exhausted from this. Let's go in a different direction. And I think that's why they're finding success. And that's where the left just can't quite come to terms with, we were out of control and we need to come back to the middle.
You know what? I was at an event last night with a couple of Democratic members of Congress, and one of them very prominent. And he said to me, Sean, we've known each other a while, and he's from a very prominent political family, and said, I got to be honest with you, I don't know, I've got a lot of programs that go through like the YMCA, the boys clubs, and I'm worried about some of the cuts that we're going to affect. And I said, yeah, I'm sorry. I get it. I understand the good that a lot of that stuff does in communities. But I said, with all due respect, you guys, and this echoes what you just said, Dan, I go, the problem is you guys went so far that now people are going, all right, well, let's kind of make it, maybe take it back to square one and rebuild it. But I said, I feel sorry for you. I understand what that does to your community and how important some of these programs are. I know what, the impact they had in where I grew up in different ways. But you guys went so far nuts that it's hard to now feel bad that when we pull it back, and then that's the problem. And he said, okay. And I said, so instead, he said, well, what do you think he goes, just give me some advice. And I said, well, my advice to you is to say, hey, we get it. We went too far. I get that some of these programs sound absolutely nuts and crazy, and you're right to cancel them, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, and give specific examples. Elon talked about this yesterday in the cabinet meeting, where they got to restore things, but make the case, on merit. Say, hey, these programs do this for this community, and here's why it's important. But you guys now, you got called out, figuratively, for all of the woke, ridiculous, nonsensical spending. Now, so you have a credibility problem, and you need to come back to the table and say, okay, I get it. And I said, I'm not blaming you personally, Congressman, but I'm saying your side. And so you now need to go back to square one and say, okay, guys, how do we show you that these 5 programs weren't nuts?
Yep.
I also think there's a chance that Trump is going to overreach. I mean, the history of politics is you get out of control and you overreach. And so I think there will be opportunities, but people won't hear us until we have some self-reflection. And I think it's not just woke. I think this went on a lot of levels to a lot of other issues where the party, all sorts of parts of society are coming back.
Yeah. Let me tell you a story about the airport I'm in right now. This airport used to be called National. And I once went to a meeting with Grover Norquist, the conservative activist who was on the cutting edge of the new model that Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and others are engaged in, where it's not just providing content, it's also making change. And they said at Grover's meeting, we're going to rename Reagan, the National Airport, after Ronald Reagan. Some of you may not remember, but it used to be Ronald Reagan was seen as the devil by the left. Now, of course, they would happily have Ronald Reagan. And no one on the left paid any attention. They paid no attention to the notion that they were going to rename the airport. And then they did, much to the horror of Gene Sperling and other people in the Clinton administration. They forced the name to change. That project is now being replicated 1,000 times over every day by people on the right who say, what can we do today from the White House, from Charlie Kirk's podcast, from Steve Bannon's podcast, from activists all over the country? What can we do today to claim some ground that the left used to control. And again, the left has no idea this is happening, as best I can tell. They have no strategy to stop it. They are overmatched. And the last thing they don't understand is how much of their power has been based on controlling these institutions.
Another funny story from last night. First of all, Mark, do you know who carried the Reagan bill? Just this is like Dorkville.
Yeah.
Bob Barr of Georgia. That was because
Correct.
got him doing. So I was out at this event last night, and lots of compliments about the morning meeting. And a guy came up to me and said, "I love watching your show because you guys are so blah blah blah." He goes, "Because I can't bring myself to watch Bannon's War Room." And I looked at him and I go, "Well, first of all, thank you for watching the morning meeting. I really appreciate that. But you should watch the War Room." And he goes, "What?" And I go, "If you want to understand what's happening and who's driving this movement, that's the dumb. I mean, strategically, it's like, well, I'll listen to Rachel Maddow once in a while. I want to hear what the other side is saying in their arguments. Or actually, you could just watch War Room, and Bannon will play Maddow's clips too. But the point is that I was like, this is the problem. You literally, I get you enjoy our program, and God bless you, and I love you for that. But you're putting your head in the sand when it comes to understanding the other side. You don't have to like Steve, but you have to understand the power and the influence that he has in the movement. Same thing with Charlie and some of these other folks.
Yeah,
Democrats do understand. Like out in the country, I agree with you, Mark. And I think the Gang of 500, as you like to call them, like the older generation doesn't, they get it, but they can't believe it. I do think there are people who, I think the problem is the party does not know, okay, now what do we stand for? Like, right. We know what we did doesn't.
And what's worth fighting for. I can't be very articulate about how exactly the White House Correspondents Association for the last 40 years have aided and abetted Democrats over Republicans. I can hint at it, but I know intuitively they've been a part of the establishment firmament, just like corporate CEOs, just like universities, just like CAA. They've been part of buttressing Democrats and creating an asymmetrical advantage for Democrats. And then the Trump White House is saying, no longer. Like, there'll be a White House group of correspondents, but the Correspondents Association, which has aided and abetted the other side, no, we're just not going to facilitate that.
I said to this person that I'm telling about, like about the dinner last night, I said, look, can I just be honest with you? Let me ask you this as a reporter. If you wrote about your own dinner, but it wasn't the White House Correspondents' dinner, it was a charity, and you talked about how much money that dinner brings in and what you guys give away in charity, you would blast that organization because you charge thousands of dollars a seat, and then you give a pittance away to scholarships. And the answer I got back was, Sean, we also have to maintain a rainy day fund. I go, right. You've got to be kidding me. If you took that association, put blinders on it and said, here's an organization that raises a ton of money by hosting a liberal dinner every year, raises millions, and then gives a pittance to charity, you would call that a scam.
Yes, Dan, let me just explain. Maybe I can put it in a different way. They are losing assets right now every day. The DEI programs are going away from all these corporations, right? Bezos is flipping to be the Wall Street Journal editorial board. If you're a leader of the Democratic Party, you're not in a position to fight to save these assets. There'd be no, even if you wanted to, you probably couldn't at this point. Right. But they're losing assets, and they are either powerless. There's some combination of powerless and ignorant of the fact that losing these assets is meaningful. It's meaningful, and it's a real problem because they don't have ideas, they don't have leaders, they don't have the capacity. So you're not gonna have some young, like Richie Torres isn't going to be like, I need to call Bezos and get him to not change the editorial board, or I need to help strategize a rally on behalf of the White House Correspondents Association. He's got other stuff to do, and he's one of the few people with the creativity and the vision to say we need to have assets. They're losing assets.
This gets back to this whole ethos of what we've talked about. Dan's articulated very well in the past. The Democrats in the media need to say, you're right, and then here's the line, but here's what we care about, or here's what we should preserve. They're missing the opportunity. And I mean, Dan's been singing this from the treetops for months, but it's like every time I hear a Democrat talk about we can all agree they're waste, but we don't like the way we're doing this. My answer is, you had your chance and did nothing. So don't complain that after decades of excuses, someone's finally addressing a $36 trillion debt, a $2 trillion deficit. You may not like it. And again, well, it's not going to address the whole thing. Okay, maybe it gets us a quarter way there, but that's better than the nothing that we're doing now.
Well, I'll just add to this quick. One, please don't tell me it's about debt and deficit, but we'll get to that later on. But two, I think the issue really here for all these companies and Mark, for these institutions is for the last kind of 20 years, maybe 15, there's been a creep of right and wrong, right? It is hard to run a business where you disrespect half the marketplace. And I think that what is beginning to happen is there's this recognition of we have to welcome in we have to bring in more customers. We have to be seen as a welcoming place for the other half of the country. And I think for the Democratic Party, it's not that we have to give up our ideals or not fight, but you have to recognize the need to broaden the coalition, to bring in other voices, to at least tolerate and listen to them. Correct. Versus patronizingly just say, Correct. Get out.
Correct. All right. One more question, quick question for Dan and Sean, and then get to your questions. Again, please raise your hand if you'd like to be in the conversation. We'd love some new folks as well. Who should the Democrats choose to do the opposition response to the president's speech next week? Who would be the smartest choice? Dan.
I would say Marie Perez. I would go small, stay away from 2028ers. They'll do nothing. The only thing they can do is hurt themselves. She is laser focused on the economy. I bet a lot of Trump's speech will not be on the economy. It'll be on DOGE and immigration and like everything else. Keep it simple. Keep it focused.
Sean.
I hate what I'm about to say because I don't like giving, but you know what I would do? I would take 4 Americans who are impacted by DOGE cuts. I'd get a veteran, whatever, and sit them at a table and just say, tonight we sat there as Americans listening to the thing. We need a party that's going to fight back. We've talked to the leader. I mean, blah, 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 but don't make it about a member of Congress or a governor. Have 4 Americans that represent 4 aspects of America that are impacted by DOGE. Maybe have, a young American there. I think it would be smart to make sure they're 18 or 19 so they're an adult, but talk about, we've relied on this, but not the amorphous stuff, like a veteran who said, I came back from Iraq and Afghanistan. I was able through veterans preferences to get a job with the federal government where I wouldn't have been able to get hired in the private sector because of some of the ailments that I have. And, now I'm out of work. And so that's the price. I mean, make it real as opposed to Washington, which is where everyone misses the mark sometimes.
Yeah, I love it. My idea is similar to that, although yours is better, which is some business person. I didn't spend the time to research it, but some business person who's benefited, who's got an accomplished record in the private sector and who's benefited from government programs, whether they're in the military and GI Bill or VA, someone who can tell the story of how you can be a free market advocate and care about debt and deficit. And ideally be someone, again, with a record of accomplishment in public service who can explain how the federal government has worked for them and their community.
By the way, we'll see. I got to keep saying this. The debt and deficit stuff is a complete joke. I just cannot keep saying this enough.
Of course.
The question is, how big are they going to blow a hole in it with tax cuts?
Yeah, you're right.
Got to say it.
You're right. I will say though that we're probably all wrong, and it'll be Schumer and Jeffries together.
Oh God, he's going to sing. He's going to sing and dance.
Yeah. This is the problem. With the leaders, politicians can't get out of their own way sometimes, and that's the problem. Is they don't know when to say. The smart move is not to make it about me.
Yeah,
I actually love that idea of going in a different direction and stop having real people. The Green Bay Diner, Mark, rent it out.
Yeah, rent it out. Michael, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind, please.
Hi everyone. Thanks. Been watching for a while. I love the platform. I'm in China. I've been here for about 28 years. I'm an unabashed Sinophile. I love the People's Republic. Don't necessarily like everything that they do, but I love China. I love the Chinese. I guess the thing I wanted to just maybe point out is, or maybe if you don't mind, I wanted to just read something very briefly and get your thoughts on it. It says, taking the long view, we simply cannot afford to leave China forever outside the family of nations, there to nurture its fantasies, cherish its hates, threaten its neighbors. There's no place on this small planet for 1 billion of its most able people to live in angry isolation. We could go disastrously wrong if in pursuing this long-range goal, we failed in the short range to read the lessons of history. Apologies, I'm a bit nervous. That was written.
You're doing great. Yeah, go ahead.
That was written by Richard Nixon in 1967. And the reason I read that is that I think this issue with Ukraine and with Russia, I don't think people are actually considering how important the prospect of peace really is. And as I said, I've lived in China for 28 years. And the world, whether we like it or not, is a much, much better place because of the development of China. And as I hear everyone talking about Trump and Putin and Zelensky, I don't hear a whole lot about how fundamentally important it is to develop and cultivate friendships with other cultures and countries.
So
I just want to point out, because as people attack Putin, you're not going to go very far when you come to China and you attack Mao Zedong, for example, or people like that. And I think it's often misunderstood that other cultures and people don't necessarily see their leadership the way Americans want them to.
Right. Michael, hold on one second.
And so
Michael, just hold on one second. I'll come back to it. Let me just say a few things. First of all, the president posted on Truth Social while we were on the air about tariffs regarding Canada and Mexico and China. And some people in the press are saying, well, he's now clarified the tariffs are happening. I'll say again, when he says something about tariffs, it is just the latest bid to keep people off balance. Doesn't mean the tariffs are actually happening, even though he said they are. So stand by on that. Michael, did you hear what President Trump said about China yesterday and about Xi? But do you happen to hear that?
I know he has said many times that, you know, he respects him and all of that.
Yeah.
My point, Mark, isn't about Xi and China. My point is that Richard Nixon is probably one of the most severe anti-communists that ever lived. And yet it's about 53 years ago this week, at the end of February 1972, that he flew to this country.
Yeah.
And he made an overture to this country. And as I hear people maligning President Trump constantly for trying to make overtures to Putin, I think they're being very short-sighted. The prospect for peace across the world and allowing other countries to develop is really quite significant.
Yes. And Michael, there's no doubt that what China's done, raising people out of poverty, has been one of the great accomplishments of the last 100, 200 years. There's no doubt that you can't ignore China, but there's also no doubt that they steal from us. They spy on us. They violate human
100%.
rights. Their expansionist military, they scare the heck out of South Korea and Japan. So I think Donald Trump's attitude towards China is exactly right, which is he wants to try to bring about peace, but he's not unrealistic about the need to check them in certain areas where they're not just an economic competitor, they're ruthless and amoral.
Yeah, I think
Mark,
when it comes to Ukraine and Putin, we have to go back to what is Putin's goal? What has he publicly said? Like the number of US presidents that have looked into his soul and tried to find ways to work with him, or European heads of state. He is ruthless and public that his goal is to bring Eastern Europe back into the Russian fold. He's very clear about that. Some of it is ethnic. Some of it is strategic, because European armies have marched through the plains of Eastern Europe for 1,000 years and tried to conquer his country. But like, we have to be clear, peace is great, right? Chamberlain believed peace was great. Europe believed peace. I'm not saying he's Hitler, but like, you have to have your eyes wide open. I'll extend a hand. You show me you're trustworthy. That is why I am so concerned, because Putin in his career has never shown to be trustworthy, ever.
I don't think that's a fair assessment. I understand your point, but you're thinking trustworthy in the sense of dealing with someone like an American. He is trustworthy in that you can't trust him. You can simply trust that you don't have to trust him. My point, and this isn't about China, my point is that because of a visionary like Richard Nixon to come to China and open the door, when Mao Zedong opens the door, no one else is going to close it. And you're correct, Mark. I'm not an apologist for the Chinese. Don't get me wrong. But, you know, and I'm a very patriotic American. My simple point is that the world is a better place because China has become successful. The world will be a better place if Russia is allowed to be successful, if other countries. I'm not saying that we are naive about it.
But Michael, Russia has defined success as taking back Eastern Europe.
Russia has probably defined success as taking back parts of Eastern Europe, but that doesn't mean they're going to get what they want. It means that You have to engage in constant
All right, hold on.
negotiation.
Let's
China has
Michael,
defined
Michael,
Negotiation.
let's
Here's
let-
some
let-
cookie.
let's let-
Here's
let's
some
let-
more cookie.
let's let
Like-
Sean in. Sean, go ahead.
Come on.
Look, I would just say with respect to Russia, I think one of the, like, I think President Trump is very serious when he talks about wanting to be a president of peace. Like, he does not like destruction, death, killing. So I hope that that's the focus, right? Keeping us safe, keeping the world safe. And that should be the number one priority, is looking out for not just us, but the rest of the world. So keep them in check. I think Russia has not Russia, the people, but Putin has very evil motives. And I think he has demonstrated that over and over again. So I don't entirely I think I don't trust someone who's untrustworthy, but I think maybe eyes wide open. I think when it comes to China, I will say this. Their leadership does not have good motives. They're very clear what their intentions are. And I think they are the greatest threat to our society in our world. And we need to be open to that. Where I think over and over again on both sides of the aisle, we have screwed up since Nixon, is this idea that they are, quote, a responsible stakeholder, and we just need to allow them to see the fruits of democracy and capitalism and that they will evolve. That's not what they're allowed to do. And so we need to be eyes wide open that this idea of we fly over and have one more meeting with them and there's a naiveness, frankly, among our leadership about the idea that somehow they share the goals of climate change. And I mean, this is a joke. So,
I agree entirely.
Good.
I agree 100%.
Michael,
My only point was just to say that in the discussion of anything, the prospect of making a long-standing peace allows for the changes that then you might want to get. You first have to establish the long-standing peace.
Sure, and I think that's
really
right.
my
But I think we
only
need to
point.
be obvious. You can't trust the Chinese. You can't trust the Russians.
Michael.
So I just,
Sorry, Michael, I want to let other folks in. Just tell us briefly, what do you do in China, and how'd you find two-way?
I'm an educator, and I found it in my home in Texas. I actually found it, I think, near the assassination attempt on Trump. But I've been in China, like I said, a long time, and I'm not I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about it. I'm not an apologist for what you're saying. I'm simply saying that I think it does matter to explore what a culture can do when they're given the opportunity to be peaceful with other groups. So thank you.
We agree. We agree with that point. Thank you for joining. We're grateful to you, and we hope you come back regularly. All right. I'm managing the clock here. Going to bring in three folks at once, and let everybody have their say, and then we'll kind of try to respond as a group. Maybe your topics will all be the same. Who knows? Laura, welcome in. Celia, welcome in.
Hello.
Jana, welcome
Hello,
in.
everybody.
Laura, you first. What's on your mind?
So, about who should do the response to the State of the Union, before I heard Sean's answer, which is the correct answer, I would have said Senator Ruben Gallego, who beat Kerry Lake by a lot in a state that Trump won. He's a veteran, he's young, he doesn't do the kowtowing to the liberal talking points. He's not afraid to say what he thinks. I've been hearing him a lot lately on interviews. And his frankness, his authenticity, his life story, the people, how he campaigned by actually talking to real people, I think he could be a very persuasive Democrat, which is what we need right now, because I don't know who else there is, frankly.
Yeah, he's an interesting choice. I have to say, people have been touting his social media stuff. I don't think his performance is that good. I agree with everything you said about his bio, but he's just not that good a performer. And I think he'd be nervous, but I wouldn't. I think he's as good as, if you're going to do a politician. I think you're right. All right, Laura, stay with us. Celia,
well, don't forget, he was super progressive before he decided to run for Senate. He got about a 180-degree turn.
Yeah, but
I didn't know that.
Oh, he was a Bernie supporter. He's easily the most liberal person Arizona's elected statewide in forever, and it's kind of incredible. And it just shows what a weak candidate Kerry Lake was, that she couldn't make the people of Arizona see how liberal he is. He's extremely liberal, or at least he was.
I got off all social media, so I don't even see that anymore.
Celia, what's on your mind?
Okay, so kind of to what you guys were talking about a little bit ago. First, quick thing. Did I see correctly that Eugene Daniels just got an MSNBC Weekend Roundtable?
Hasn't been announced, but that's what's being reported.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that was accurate reporting. If so, interesting. That has almost kind of, I am really a Chesterton's fence sitter in just about every institution and tradition that exists. But after hearing that, I'm like, okay, what's better? A White House Correspondents Association run by someone that just got a hosting job on MSNBC or having a possible future Democratic administration choose the press pool. I mean, to me, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. So as for right now, it has made me care less and less about the White House correspondence issue. But kind of separate of that, I think so much of what I've noticed the chasm so much more in information between people on the left and right post Trump's inauguration. And I think a great example, you referenced Robbie Starbuck. I think he was slightly involved in this, but we have seen a few years out, the Bud Light scandal still kind of hit that company. And in the past month or so, I believe, a former executive from Anheuser-Busch put out a piece with the Free Press, kind of describing his side, how he thinks things have changed within the culture. And he really references a big point being them moving headquarters from St. Louis to New York City. And how that kind of, first it changed the people willing to move or wanting to be moved from Missouri to New York. And then it kind of changed it changed all their advertising. It changed where their focus was trying to be demographic wise. And it went away from their loyal base toward more of a millennial kind of Gen Z base, which gave us the Dylan Mulvaney saga. And I mean, I think a little bit of this chasm also was shown on your fantastic episode of Two-Way Tonight last night. It was a wonderful episode. And it made me think of a Tablet magazine piece that I saw a few months ago, and I went back and read it last night, and it came out in October, and it was basically about how Republican activists have to water down Democratic positions to focus groups simply because people do not believe them. And it goes into the mechanisms that Democratic activists and some very far left-leaning politicians use, whether that be language manipulation. All of a sudden, everyone refers to hormone replacement therapies as gender-affirming care. And it basically insulates people from the impact of a lot of these positions and agenda items. And I was just kind of wondering, how do we get past that? Because it feels like everyone's speaking different languages. No one has shared information. We can't get to equal and agreed upon fact points.
Yep.
I don't know how this continues.
Great question, Sean.
I think look, that you just put your finger on, I think, one of the things that we talked about at the beginning. I mean, honestly, I'm a very conservative, like libertarian person, right? You want to call yourself something or live, I don't care, right? You answer to God, and as long as you're good with him, then that's your problem. Where I care is when you tell me what I have to believe, right? And this is where the line, to tell me that you can't say mother anymore and it has to be like fetus carrier, just is stupid. And it's defying logic and what's happening. And it's also, in many cases, some of the stuff that's happening defies the same science that we've been told we have to follow. So where I think the line is crossed is a difference between you can believe what you can believe, I can believe what I have to believe. Where the line has been really crossed in the last decade is you telling me what I must say or do, right? You demanding that I agree to your prescribed language. That's what I haven't really cared in the past about what somebody wants to refer to themselves as or live their lifestyle. But when you start telling me that you have a right to tell me not just what I must say or do, but if I don't, then I will be canceled. That's where, and so to your point, we need to get back to a place. And the same thing goes with businesses. I want to go to Target to buy a shirt or a pack of gum, not to be indoctrinated in a way of life. And that's the problem, is that these companies lost their way. You go to Home Depot to buy tools or whatever. You don't go, and that's a bad example because they're not, but I'm just saying, like, companies lost their focus. Their focus was to provide a service or a product, not to be part of a cultural revolution or spreading an indoctrination of a way of life.
Dan.
Yeah, I think I said earlier that, the Trump people may go too far. Like, both sides are guilty of this. See the Gulf of America or the Gulf of Mexico. You got to call it one, right? Or you're out. Like, so both sides, when they have the power, like to flex down. It's our way or the highway. It's a little bit of a bully mentality. And I think
But Dan, can I just say this? That might not be the best example. If he called it the Gulf of Trump, I'd be with you. But saying to something
I know, but Sean, it's the same point, right? Which is like the MAGA army, if you kind of say the wrong thing, right, will like come at you that you don't represent, you're not doing the right thing, right? Like you're a lib. You're not like, this is how America is now. Like we won. I go on Blue Sky and X. It is as if the sun rises in both the East and the West. It is the same, issue looked at completely differently. I don't have the answer. Like at times, even like I love politics. I love this. I love the show. I love hearing from you. There are times at night I'm like, oh my God, like it's exhausting and depressing. And like, but then I get up and I'm like, all right, we'll figure out how to do this. Like, I don't know, but a candidate who can crack that code, he or she will be very successful because it is alternate universe.
But Celia, I would just say this: the problem isn't a candidate or a leader; it's a culture, and that's when Mark's talking about Jeff Bezos, the Post. They've gone too far collectively. Academia, Hollywood, big tech, corporate America. All of these institutions stray way to the left, outside of the mainstream. And I think all they're doing is coming back. The idea think about this: what Jeff Bezos is saying is that, hey, for the decades we've had this opinion page that has told you what we think is the right way to live your life. And now we're just actually going to tell you about like business oriented stuff and whatever. It's not coming to our side. The right doesn't seek to dominate and say, we're now going to use all of our words. Like we're actually just saying, go back to actually the middle, go to what you want. Robbie Staubach isn't saying to Target or Bud Light, you need to cater to us. It's stop going to the left. Just get back to your core mission. There's a big difference. And that's where I would argue that it's not the same. The right isn't telling the left, you need to adapt to our stuff. You just need to stop doing the leftist stuff.
Oh, I think you follow the leader of an organization. And if we get a leader one day who can say, you know what, like Sean Hannity's a good guy and like, don't always agree with them. And like Rachel Maddow's cool. And I don't always agree with her. Like right now it is right and wrong. With all due respect, Sean, the right is very, very comfortable right now saying we won. This is how it is, guys. Like,
but
get over yourself.
And I don't disagree with you, Dan, but this is what it is a return to normalcy, not a, hey, we're going to tell you that you have to now go to church on Sundays. That would, I mean, most conservatives believe in God and religion, but we're not saying you have to live our life. It's just stop going with the left woke stuff.
Jackie, welcome in. Do you have something you can say in 45 seconds?
Well, I actually had an observation. I had two questions, but I think I know the answer to one, and I don't think there's time to answer the other. So just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I am a Trump supporter. I'm actually full on base right now. I am totally with MAGA. I'm a convert all the way. I love what he's doing with Doge. I've been in business, software technology for the better part of 30 years. I kind of understand. You guys, I gave up on the whole t-shirt jeans thing for technologists years ago. You're just never going to win that battle. He's never going to wear a tie. He's always going to wear a t-shirt. That's the way they roll.
None of us want him to wear a tie.
But I do. There is something, the observation that I want to make is just the difference between, like a couple weeks ago, we had the optics, right? Maxine Waters, Chuck Schumer, split screen to Vice President Vance coming down, carrying his kids. They're in their little pajama bottoms. You have Waters, split screen to Caroline Leavitt. I mean, just the optics of who Trump, the party, right, is just seems young and fresh. And then you have a Congressman Schakowsky. I probably said that wrong.
Yeah, Jan Schakowsky. Yep.
Yep. It just, the difference. So Dan, I think you all have an optics problem, but it's Trump's entire cabinet. The question I have is, I love what Elon's doing. Again, I love Doge, cut the waste. I think at some point, yes, you're going to have to reform Medicare and Social Security, Medicare, not a question. But before you come after that, because I'm getting close to that age, before you come after my retirement, you better cut waste everywhere else.
Yes.
Because as a family, that's what I would do.
Jackie, I hate to cut you off, but we got to stay on time. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Just say she's right. She's
Yeah,
right.
everybody agrees, Jackie has that. Thank you all for joining. Thanks everybody for the questions. Sean, what do you have coming up tonight on your show?
A big panel discussion on all the stuff that we've talked about. So we're gonna. I writ down, as I do most days. I get more topics doing this. So then, by the way, I'll just preview tomorrow. Trump's former staff secretary and personal aide, Derek Lyons and Jordan Karam, are going to talk about what it was like to work that intimately with Trump. And I've got some doozy questions for him. Just that should be fun. If you really want to know what it's like to work with the guy, I think we're going to have a fun little staff reunion.
All right, check out Sean's show, and I'll be back at 6 tonight, 2-way tonight, and then the three of us will be back to close the week at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Next week, I will anchor special coverage on 2-way of the president's address to Congress, as well as a Democratic response. We'll get you details soon, but you can join us for a 2-way style coverage of the president's speech before, during, and after.
I will be coming to us live tomorrow from, I think, the Catholic Prayer Breakfast, where JD Vance will have that on his schedule. He will be there tomorrow. So
what time is that?
It starts at 7 a.m.
Okay, good. Well, you will expect a lot of on the scene, on-site reporting. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you at 6, and again, we'll see you at 9 tomorrow. Good night. Good day.